The wind on the Llano Estacado did not blow. It scoured. It was a physical weight, a relentless hand pressing down on the flat, endless land, stripping away moisture and hope with equal indifference. For Jessie Keller, the wind was just another enemy in a week that had been full of them. She placed one foot in front of the other, a mechanical motion that required a conscious summon of will. Her boots. Once fine leather suited for the paved streets of St. Louis, were now cracked and gray with dust. The sole of the left boot had begun to separate 3 days ago, flapping with a dull, rhythmic sound against the hard-packed earth. Flap step, flap step. It was the only sound in the world, save for the hollow rush of air past her ears. She had been walking for 6 days, or perhaps it was 7. Time had dissolved into the position of the sun. High meant suffering. Low meant the mercy of the cooling air, but also the terror of the dark. Jessie shifted the leather satchel strap to her other shoulder. The leather bit into her collarbone, wearing away the fabric of her travel dress. That bag contained her life, or rather, the destruction of her previous one. She did not dare open it. She knew it contained ledgers, loose papers, and maps taken from her stepfather's private desk, the desk he had forbidden anyone to touch. She had grabbed them in a blind panic, thinking only to take something he valued, something to use as leverage if he caught her before she made the train. She had not expected them to be heavy enough to drag her down, nor dangerous enough to put men on her trail with rifles and cold eyes. She licked her lips, tasting iron and grit. Her throat felt like it was lined with dry felt. The water canteen she had bartered for in a settlement 40 miles back was light, sloshing with perhaps 2 mouthfuls of tepid liquid. She had to make it last until she found the next well. Don't think about the water, she told herself. Think about the anger. The anger keeps you moving. The memory of Ambrose, her stepfather, rose unbidden. She saw the heavy velvet curtains of the drawing room in St. Louis, smelling of stale cigar smoke and lemon polish. She remembered the way the light caught the gold watch chain across his vest as he advanced on her, the smell of whiskey on his breath, the terrifying clarity of his intentions after her mother's funeral. He had thought her grief made her weak. He had thought her silence meant submission. She had broken a crystal decanter over his head. The sound of shattering glass still rang in her nightmares. Jessie stumbled, her toe catching on a hidden root of mesquite. She fell hard, her palms scraping against the unforgiving ground. The impact jarred her teeth. She lay there for a moment, the smell of sagebrush and dry dirt filling her nose. It would be so easy to stay here, to let the earth reclaim her, to let the dust bury the shame and the fear. No, she pushed herself up. She was 24 years old. She was not a victim. She was a survivor. She dusted off her hands, ignoring the sting of fresh abrasions. She checked the horizon. To the north lay the canyon lands, a maze of red rock and shadows. To the south, the flat expanse leading toward the Pecos River. She was avoiding the stage road, keeping parallel to it but out of sight. The road was where the law lived, and Ambrose had bought the law. In St. Louis, the police captain had dined at their table every Sunday. Out here, money spoke even louder than it did in the city. She was alone in the great American desert, a small, pale figure moving across a canvas so vast it made human life seem like a rounding error. 5 miles to the west, where the earth began to wrinkle into the breaks of a dry creek bed. Tawakoni drove a hammer into a glowing horseshoe. Clang. The sound was sharp, definitive. It was the sound of civilization, or at least the edge of it. Taw wiped the sweat from his forehead with his forearm. The heat in the smithy was intense, radiating from the forge he had built with river stones and clay. But he did not mind it. The heat was honest. Fire was honest. He was a tall man, broad in the shoulders, his long black hair tied back with a simple leather thong. He wore the trousers of a white settler, canvas and durable, but his shirt was buckskin, and on his feet were moccasins he had sewn himself. He walked the line between 2 worlds, a line that grew thinner every year the railroad crept closer. "Iron looks good." "Taw," a voice said from the corral. Miguel sat on the top rail of the fence, rolling a cigarette with practiced ease. The older vaquero had joined Taw 2 years ago, drifting up from the borderlands with a bad leg and a good heart. He was the only man within 50 miles who didn't look at Taw and see a savage first and a man second. "It will hold," Taw said. His English was precise, lacking the slang that peppered the speech of the cowboys who passed through. He dipped the shoe into the water barrel. Steam hissed violently, rising in a white plume. "The mare has a tender frog on the left fore. This will keep the pressure off." Taw walked out of the shade of the lean-to structure that served as his smithy. He looked out over his land. It was a modest claim. A few hundred acres centered around a natural spring that bubbled up from the limestone, the only reliable water for 20 miles in any direction. He had filed the papers in Austin himself, standing before a clerk who had sneered at his name but taken his silver dollars. Tawakoni's Way Station. That was what the sign on the main post said. A place to water horses, repair a broken axle, and trade for fresh supplies. But to the people of Creekside, the town 10 miles east, it was just the Indians' place, a nuisance, a threat. "You feel it?" Miguel asked, striking a match on the sole of his boot. "The wind?" Taw asked, though he knew that was not what Miguel meant. "The trouble," Miguel said. He took a drag and pointed his chin toward the horizon. "The sky is too yellow, birds are too quiet, and Aunt Sapa has been singing that song all morning, the one about the storm that has no rain." Taw looked toward the small cabin where Aunt Sapa lived. She was his father's sister, a woman who had seen the buffalo cover the earth like a moving black carpet. She was old now, her face a map of deep lines, her eyes milky with cataracts. Yet she saw more than any scout he had ever known. "Rusk is moving his herd north," Taw said quietly. "He will be thirsty." "Colton Rusk is always thirsty," Miguel replied, his voice darkening. "And he does not like paying a Comanche for water that he thinks God gave to white men." Taw tightened his grip on the hammer. "The law says this is my land, Miguel." "The water rights are filed," Miguel laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Paper. Taw. Paper burns. Rusk has men, he has guns, and he has the ear of that snake, the Indian agent." Taw did not answer. He knew Miguel was right. The tension had been building for months. Riders cutting his fences, cattle straying onto his garden patch, rumors in town that Taw was harboring renegades, that he was signaling raiding parties with smoke. It was all lies, manufactured to justify what Rusk wanted to do, take the water. Taw walked over to the water trough and splashed his face. The water was cool and sweet. It was life. He would not give it up. He had fought once, as a young warrior, when the soldiers came. He had seen the futility of arrows against cannons. He had chosen a different path to survive by becoming immovable, by rooting himself into the earth with legal deeds and hard labor. He wanted a home, not a grave. But as he looked out at the shimmering heat haze, he wondered if there was a difference anymore. In the shadow of the cabin, Aunt Sapa sat on a woven rug, sorting dried herbs. Her hands, gnarled like old oak roots, moved with dexterity. She paused, her head tilting to the side like a bird listening for a worm in the earth. She felt the vibration in the ground before she heard the sound. Horses, shod horses, moving fast, then slowing. But it was not the horses that made her shiver. It was the other presence, a singular, desperate heartbeat moving across the plains, a chaotic energy, full of fear and sharp edges. "Change is coming," she whispered in the tongue of her people. "Blood on the wind, and a woman who walks with ghosts." She gathered the sage into a bundle and tied it with a red string. She placed it near the door. Protection. They would need it. Jessie had found a narrow fissure in a limestone outcropping, a shallow cave barely deep enough to conceal her body. She pressed herself back into the shadows, pulling her knees to her chest, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. 10 minutes ago, she had heard them, the dull thud of hooves. She had scrambled off the game trail she had been following and thrown herself into the rocks just as 3 riders crested the rise. They had stopped less than 50 yards away. She could see them through a crack in the stone. They were dusty men, wearing long duster coats despite the heat. They rode heavy horses, animals built for endurance, Lost the track. One man grunted. He had a beard that obscured half his face and a hat pulled low. She can't have gone far, a second man said. His voice was high, reedy, grating. Not on foot. Not in this heat. She's a city girl. She's probably dead in a ditch somewhere. Mr. Thorne wants proof. Not probably, the third man said. He seemed to be the leader. He sat straight in his saddle, holding a Winchester rifle across his thighs. He pays $500 for the girl alive, $200 for the body, but he wants the bag she's carrying more than he wants her breath. Jessie clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a whimper. $500. It was a fortune. Men killed for the price of a bottle of whiskey out here. For $500, they would hunt her to the gates of hell. You think she headed for Creekside? The bearded man asked. It's the only town for 3 days' ride, the leader said. Unless she found the Indians' place. That's savage. The reedy voice spat. If she went there, she's worse than dead. Comanches don't take kindly to trespassers. We check the creek bed, the leader commanded. Then we circle back toward the stage road. If she is out here, the buzzards will show us where she is soon enough. They spurred their horses and rode south, passing so close to Jessie's hiding spot that she could smell the horse sweat and the stale tobacco of the riders. She waited for an hour after they had gone, her body trembling uncontrollably. The sun beat down on the rock above her, turning her hiding place into an oven. She was trapped. If she went back, she would die. If she stayed, she died of thirst. If she went forward, the Indians' place. The men had mentioned it with fear and loathing. A Comanche. In St. Louis. The newspapers were full of lurid stories about the savages of the plains. They wrote of scalping, of torture, of women carried off to fates worse than death. Jessie had read them with the detached horror of someone reading fiction. Now, that fiction was her only geographic reality. She crawled out of the rocks. Her legs were shaky. She looked to the southwest, the direction the riders had not gone. In the distance, a thin gray line rose into the white-blue sky. Smoke. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant people. People meant water. She looked at her hands. They were blistered, the nails broken, dirt ingrained in every pore. She thought of the papers in her bag. The map she had glanced at briefly showed water rights. It showed boundaries. She took a step, then another. She would go to the smoke, if it was a trap. Let it be a trap set by a stranger, not the men sent by the man who had destroyed her family. She would rather die facing a Comanche warrior than be dragged back to the velvet-draped prison of Ambrose Thorne. The town of Creekside was a collection of raw lumber and ambition huddled against the banks of a creek that ran dry 6 months of the year. It consisted of a general store, a livery stable, a saloon that doubled as a meeting hall, a white-painted church that looked startled to be there, and the sheriff's office. Inside the sheriff's office, the air was stagnant. Sheriff Harlan leaned back in his chair, his boots on the desk. He was a man who had been tired for 20 years. He watched the man standing by the window. Colton Rusk was not a large man, but he occupied space aggressively. He wore a suit of gray wool, impractical for the climate but essential for his image. He was the Baron of the Basin, the man who owned the cattle, and therefore owned the town. The reports are coming in. Harlan, Rusk said, his voice smooth as oiled leather. 2 calves missing from the southern herd, a fence cut near the ridge. Coyotes take calves. Mr. Rusk, Harlan said, not looking up from whittling a piece of cedar. And wind knocks down fences. Rusk turned. His eyes were the color of freezing water. It is not a coyote. It is the Comanche. He sits out there on that spring, mocking us. He harbors thieves. He signals to the renegades in the canyon. The town is afraid. Sheriff, good Christian families are afraid. Taw has lived on that claim for 3 years, Harlan said, blowing shavings off the wood. He shows horses better than anyone in the county. He pays his taxes. I have never seen him break a law. He is an Indian, Rusk said, as if that explained everything. It is in the blood. You cannot tame a wolf, Harlan. You can only put it down. Rusk leaned over the desk. His hand splayed on the wood. The railway is coming. They need water stations. They need security. That land he sits on is worth 10 times what it was last year. But not if there is a savage squatting on it. He has a deed, Harlan reminded him. Rusk smiled. A thin, mirthless expression. Deeds can be challenged, especially if the owner is a criminal. If he were to incite violence, if he were to be found with stolen goods, then the law would have to act. And I know you are a man who follows the law. Sheriff? Rusk straightened his cuffs. There is a new Indian agent coming from Austin next month. He agrees with me. The reservation is where that boy belongs. For his own safety, of course. Rusk walked to the door. Keep your eyes open. Harlan, trouble is coming. Best you be on the right side of it when it breaks. He left, the door banging shut behind him. Harlan stared at the empty doorway. He sighed and dropped the cedar stick into the spittoon. He knew Rusk was right about one thing. Trouble was coming. Rusk would make sure of it. The sun began its long descent, painting the sky in violent shades of bruised purple and blood orange. The temperature dropped, but the air remained dry. Jessie stumbled. She fell to her knees, the impact jarring her spine. She didn't have the strength to stand up immediately. She crawled forward a few feet, dragging the satchel. She could see it now, not just the smoke, but the structures. A corral made of rough-hewn poles, a low building of stone and timber, a smaller cabin, and a windmill, its blades turning lazily in the evening breeze. Water. The thought made her dizzy. She forced herself to stand, swaying like a drunkard. She saw a figure moving near the corral, a man. He was shirtless, his skin bronzed, his hair long and dark. He was lifting a saddle with easy strength. Fear spiked in her chest, cold and sharp. A Comanche. The stories of scalping knives and torture fires flooded her brain. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to run back into the dark emptiness of the plains. But behind her, in the gathering dusk, she imagined she could hear the phantom hoofbeats of the bounty hunters. They would not stop. They would circle back. She looked at the man again. He was attending to a horse, his hands moving with a gentleness that contradicted the savagery of the legends. He patted the animal's neck. Jessie took a breath that rattled in her dry chest. She adjusted her dress, trying to smooth the filth from the once elegant fabric. She pushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. She had no weapon. She had no money that mattered. She had only her desperation and the papers in her bag. She began to walk down the slope toward the station. Every step was a gamble. Every yard she covered was a wager of her life against the unknown. As she drew closer, the man stopped. He turned. Even from this distance, she felt the weight of his gaze. It was alert, predatory, intense. He did not reach for a weapon, but his stillness was more terrifying than any threat. Jessie kept walking. She walked until her legs hit the flat ground of the yard. She walked until she could smell the wood smoke and the scent of horses. She walked until she was close enough to see the dark depths of his eyes. She was walking into the fire, but it was the only light left in her world. Jessie stopped 10 feet from the wooden railing of the corral. The ground beneath her boots was hard-packed, stripped of grass by the hooves of 100 horses. The man stood on the other side of the fence, the setting sun casting his shadow long and sharp across the dust between them. He had not moved since she began her approach, and that stillness was more unnerving than if he had drawn the knife she saw sheathed at his belt. She swallowed, but her mouth was too dry to offer any relief. She tried to stand straight, to summon the posture her mother had drilled into her, the spine of a lady who had attended finishing school in St. Louis, but the desert had stripped away the varnish. She was just a woman in a ruined dress, trembling with exhaustion and thirst. "I need work," she said. Her voice cracked, a jagged sound in the evening air. She cleared her throat and tried again, forcing the words out with desperate precision. "I can cook, I can wash clothes, I can mend linens and repair torn shirts. I am not afraid of labor." The man watched her. His eyes were dark, obsidian caught in the light, unreadable and intense. He looked at her face, burnt by the sun, then down to her hands. She instinctively wanted to hide them behind her back. They were filthy, the nails broken, the skin scraped raw from her fall earlier in the day, but she held them out, palms open, a silent plea. "I have no money to pay a traveler," he said. His voice was deep, resonating in his chest. It was not the guttural grunt the dime novels attributed to his kind. It was a baritone of surprising clarity. "I do not ask for money," Jessie said quickly. "I ask for a place to sleep that is not the ground. I ask for water and a meal. I will keep it." The man opened the gate. The hinges groaned, a sound that seemed to echo in the vast silence of the plains. He stepped out, closing the distance between them. Up close, he was imposing, smelling of wood smoke, horses, and sweat. He did not smell like the alcohol that perpetually clung to Ambrose Thorne. He reached out and took her hand. Jessie flinched, her muscles locking in preparation for violence. But he did not squeeze. He turned her palm over, his thumb tracing the calluses forming on her fingers and the fresh scrapes on her heel. It was a clinical examination, like a man checking the hooves of a mare. Yet there was a strange, rough heat in his touch. "You are running," he stated. It was not a question. "I am looking for work," she insisted, though her pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He dropped her hand. He looked past her, toward the darkening horizon where the trail disappeared into the violet haze. "The people in Creekside say I'm a savage. They say I steal cattle and burn barns." "Why come to me? Because you have water," Jessie said, the truth tumbling out before she could stop it. "And because the people in Creekside talk too much. I needed a place where questions are not the currency." A flicker of something, perhaps amusement, perhaps respect, crossed his face. He crossed his arms over his chest. The muscles of his forearms shifted under the bronze skin. "I have a cook," he said. "Miguel makes beans and tortillas better than any white woman. I wash my own clothes in the creek. My shirts do not need mending because I wear buckskin." Jessie felt the ground sway beneath her. The rejection was physical, a blow to the stomach. She had gambled everything on this. She had no strength left to walk back to the road, and if she did, the men with the rifles would be waiting. Tears, hot and humiliating, pricked at the corners of her eyes. She bit the inside of her cheek to hold them back. She would not cry. She would die in the dirt before she cried in front of him. "Then I apologize for the intrusion," she whispered. She turned to leave, though her legs felt like lead weights. "Wait," she stopped. She did not turn around immediately. She waited for the cruel joke, or perhaps the demand for payment for the water she had not yet tasted. "I do not need a servant," the man said. Jessie turned slowly. He was looking at her with a terrifying intensity, his gaze stripping away the layers of dust and fear to see the bone and spirit beneath. "I need a wife." The air left the yard. Jessie stared at him, her mind blanking for a second before the words rearranged themselves into meaning. A wave of nausea rolled through her. She took a step back, her hands coming up defensively. The image of Ambrose, his heavy hands, his leering suggestions that a stepfather was not blood kin flashed before her eyes. "I am not a prostitute," she said, her voice shaking with a sudden, cold fury. "If that is the trade, I will take my chances with the coyotes." The man did not move. He did not smile. "I did not ask for a whore. I said to my wife, 'It is the same thing to men like you.'" She spat, the anger giving her a sudden, brittle energy. "Men like me." His voice dropped an octave, dangerous and low. "And what is a man like me? A man who thinks a woman is property to be bought with a drink of water?" He snorted, a sharp exhalation of breath. "You think highly of yourself. Woman. I do not want you in my bed. I want you on a piece of paper." Jessie blinked, the fury stalling in confusion. "Paper." "The law," he said. He gestured to the land around them, the corral, the cabin, the windmill turning against the purple sky. "This land is mine. I have the deed. I paid the government in Austin with gold coins. But to the county, to the sheriff, and to the cattle baron Rusk, I am just an Indian squatting on white man's grass. They look for any reason to take it. They change the boundaries on the maps. They say a Comanche cannot own water rights in this county unless he is civilized. He spat the word civilized as if it tasted of bile. A wife, he continued, his eyes locking onto hers. A white wife, with a Christian name and a signature on a marriage license, makes me a citizen in their eyes. It makes the property laws hold fast. They cannot take the land from a widow as easily as they can from a dead Indian. It gives me a shield. Jessie stared at him. It was business. It was survival. It was the coldest, most pragmatic proposal she had ever heard. And strangely, that made it less terrifying. You want a marriage in name only, she said slowly. I sleep in the barn if I must, he said. Or you take the cabin. I do not touch you. You do not touch me. You cook. You keep the house. You sign the papers when the tax collector comes. In exchange, you get a roof. You get food, and I keep the wolves away from your door. He looked at her bag, the leather satchel she clutched so tightly her knuckles were white. And whoever is chasing you, they will have to go through me. A husband has the right to protect his wife. That is also the law. Jessie looked at the man. She saw the desperation mirrored in his own eyes, not the desperation of fear, but of a man fighting a tide that sought to drown him. He was offering her a fortress, and he was asking her to be the mortar in its walls. My name is Jessie, she said. I am Tawakoni, he replied. They call me Ta. If you touch me, she said, her voice steeling itself. If you break your word, I will kill you while you sleep. I swear it on my mother's grave. Ta nodded solemnly. That is fair. Do we have an accord? Jessie looked at the gate. It was open. She could walk out. But out there was the wind, the thirst, and the men who wanted her dead. Here, there was a man who needed her signature more than her body. 30 days, she said. We will try it for 30 days. If we do not kill each other, we sign your papers. Ta studied her for a long moment. 30 days. He turned and walked toward the water trough, dipping a tin cup into the cool depths. He returned and held it out to her. Jessie took the cup. Her hands shook as she raised it to her lips. The water was sweet, colder than anything she had ever tasted. It washed the dust from her throat and brought tears to her eyes. She drank it all and lowered the cup. Thank you, she whispered. Miguel. Ta called out, not looking away from her. Set another plate. Dinner was beans spiced with chilies and cornbread cooked in a cast-iron skillet. They ate in the main cabin, a structure that surprised Jessie with its order. There were rugs on the floor woven with intricate geometric patterns, shelves lined with well-oiled tools, and a fireplace that drew well. Miguel, the older man with a limp and a smile that seemed permanently etched into his weathered face, treated Jessie with an elaborate courtesy. He did not ask why a white woman was sitting at the table of a Comanche. He simply passed the cornbread and told a story about a mule that refused to walk backward. Jessie ate until the cramping in her stomach subsided. She felt the heavy blanket of exhaustion settling over her, pulling at her eyelids. Suddenly, Miguel stopped chewing. He tilted his head, his eyes shifting to the window. Ta, Miguel said softly. The humor vanished from his face instantly. Ta was already moving. He stood up, blowing out the oil lamp on the table, plunging the room into darkness. Stay down, he ordered Jessie. Jessie froze. The darkness was sudden and complete, save for the faint moonlight filtering through the cracks in the shutters. Riders, Miguel whispered. 3, maybe 4. They are not moving like cowboys. They are moving like hunters. Jessie's heart slammed against her ribs. They found me. Ta moved to the window, peering through a small gap. Who are they? Jessie. The question hung in the dark. Jessie gripped the edge of the table. She could lie. She could say they were bandits. But if Ta went out there expecting thieves and found professionals paid to kill, he would die, and then she would die. They are bounty hunters, she whispered. Sent by my stepfather. He is a powerful man in St. Louis. What did you take? Ta asked. His voice was calm, devoid of judgment, focused entirely on the tactical reality. She hesitated. The ledger was her only leverage, her only insurance. If she told him about the money and the maps, he might take them. He might trade them. I was framed. He killed my mother. I fought back. He accused me of theft to cover his crime. They want to bring me back to hang. It was a half-truth, but it was enough. Miguel, Taw said, take her to the root cellar. Put her behind the sacks of grain. Give her the buffalo robe. It is cold down there. You cannot fight them, Jessie hissed, grabbing Taw's arm in the dark. The muscle was as hard as iron under her fingers. They have Winchesters. They will kill you. I am not going to fight them, Taw said, pulling his arm away gently. I am going to speak to them. Go. Miguel took her elbow. Vamos, señorita, quickly. He led her to a trap door in the corner of the room, hidden beneath a rug. Jessie descended into the cool, earthy darkness. Miguel handed her a heavy fur robe. Do not make a sound, Miguel whispered. Not even if you hear shooting, especially if you hear shooting. He closed the trapdoor. Jessie was alone in the absolute black, smelling of dry corn and earth. Above her, she heard the heavy thud of boots on the floorboards, then the door opening. She pulled the buffalo robe tight around her shoulders, shivering violently. She pressed her ear against the wood of the trap door. Outside, the wind carried voices. Evening, Taw's voice floated through the cracks. It was loud, projecting confidence. You are trespassing. We are looking for a girl, a voice responded. It was the same reedy voice she had heard from the rocks. The sound of it made her skin crawl. White girl, pretty. Looks like she doesn't belong within 1,000 miles of here. Seen her? I see many things, Taw said. I see 3 men on horses that are tired. I see men who did not read the sign at the property line. Don't get smart with me. Indian, the leader's voice cut in. We tracked her to the ridge. Her trail heads this way. We are going to search your buildings. You have a warrant? Taw asked. There was a pause. We don't need a warrant for your kind. The sheriff in Creekside disagrees, Taw said. And the Texas Rangers disagree. This is a deeded way station. You step off your horses without my permission, and it is assault. I have a witness here. I see the Mexican, the leader sneered. He doesn't count. I count, Miguel's voice rang out, cheerful but edged with steel. Jessie could imagine him leaning against the doorframe, perhaps holding the double-barreled shotgun he kept behind the bar. And I have a very nervous finger. Amigos, it twitches when I see rude guests. We just want the girl, the reedy voice whined. $500. We could share it. There is no girl here, Taw said. His voice was flat, final. Only 2 tired men and a lot of work to do. Now turn your horses around. The creek is dry, but the road back to town is clear. The silence that followed was agonizing. Jessie held her breath until her lungs burned. She listened for the click of a hammer, the creak of leather, the explosion of gunfire. She imagined the bullets tearing through the wood above her. You're making a mistake, boy, the leader said finally. A big one. If we find out you're hiding her, we'll burn this shack down around your ears. Good night, Taw said. Leather creaked. Horses snorted. Then, the sound of hooves turning and walking away. Slow at first, then picking up speed. Jessie let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She slumped against the grain sacks, trembling. He hadn't fought. He hadn't backed down. He had stood between her and death armed only with words and a terrifying kind of calm. A moment later, the trapdoor lifted. Light flooded in. Taw stood there, holding a lantern. Come out, he said. Jessie climbed up, her legs wobbly. She looked at him. He seemed unchanged, his breathing steady. They will be back, she said. They won't give up. I know, Taw said. He set the lantern on the table. They will camp near the ridge and watch. They will wait for a mistake. He looked at her. You lied about the theft. A man does not send 3 expensive hunters for a stepdaughter just because of a family squabble. You have something he wants. Jessie looked down. Yes, I do not want to know what it is, Taw said, raising a hand. Not yet. If I know, I become an accomplice to a crime I do not understand. But know this: if you stay, you put Miguel and Aunt Sapa in danger. You put my land in danger. I will go, Jessie said, though the thought terrified her. I will leave tonight. No, Ta said. If you leave tonight, they will catch you before you go 2 miles. They are watching the road. He walked to the window and closed the shutter, latching it tight. You stay. You work. We hold to the agreement. 30 days. Why? Jessie asked. Why risk it? Ta looked at Miguel, then back to Jessie. Because Rusk wants this land. Those men work for your stepfather, but they will talk to Rusk. If Rusk thinks I have a white woman here against her will, he brings the lynch mob. If he thinks I have a wife, he has to bring lawyers. I prefer lawyers. He picked up a rifle from the corner, not to use, but to clean. Go to sleep, he said. Tomorrow you work. The floors need scrubbing, and the water trough needs cleaning. And tomorrow night? Jessie asked. Ta looked at her, his dark eyes catching the lamplight. Tomorrow night, we will go out. If you are to be my wife, you must learn to walk like a Comanche. You make too much noise. Jessie, the ground tells stories. And right now, your feet are screaming. Jessie touched the rough wood of the table. Thank you, Ta. Do not thank me, he said, turning his back to her. Survival is not a gift. It is a job. Jessie wrapped the buffalo robe tighter around herself. She watched him for a moment longer, the broad back, the long black hair. The man who had stood unarmed against rifles. She had asked for a job. She had found a war. And for the first time since she left St. Louis, she wasn't sure she wanted to run away from it. The smell of lye soap was the first thing to change. For years, Tawakoni's way station had smelled of horse sweat, curing leather, and the acrid tang of coal smoke from the forge. It was a masculine scent, efficient and unadorned. But within 3 days of Jessie Keller's arrival, the main cabin smelled of soap and scrubbed pine. Jessie worked with a ferocity that bordered on desperation. She was not merely cleaning, she was erasing. Every stain she scrubbed from the floorboards felt like she was scrubbing away a piece of the fear that had followed her from St. Louis. She organized the pantry, stacking the tins of beans and sacks of flour in precise rows. She swept the porch until the wood grain stood out pale and clean against the surrounding dust. In the kitchen, the heavy silence that usually accompanied meal preparation was replaced by the rhythmic chop, chop, chop of a knife hitting a wooden board. Miguel watched her with wide eyes as she took his simple ingredients: cornmeal, dried chilies, salt pork, and transmuted them into something that actually had flavor. She found wild onions near the creek bed and dried sage hanging in Aunt Sapa's hut, adding them to the pot with a confidence that belied her trembling hands. Ta watched her from the smithy. He held a pair of tongs, turning a piece of red-hot iron, but his eyes were on the woman moving back and forth between the well and the cabin. She wore one of his old calico shirts, belted at the waist with a piece of rope, the sleeves rolled up to reveal arms that were growing browner by the day. She was not built for this land. He could see it in the way she paused to wipe her brow, the way she favored her left leg when she thought no one was looking. But she did not stop. That was what held his attention. Most people he had known, white or Comanche, broke under the weight of the Llano Estacado. They withered in the wind. Jessie Keller seemed to be hardening, like clay in a kiln. He walked up to the porch as she was shaking out a rug. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sun. You will wear the wood thin if you scrub any harder, Ta said, leaning against the post. Jessie stopped, breathless. A smudge of soot marked her cheekbone, making her blue eyes look startlingly bright. Dirt is the enemy of order, Mr. Tawakoni, and without order, things fall apart. Ta, he corrected her, as he did every day. And the dirt out here is not an enemy. It is just the world. You cannot scrub away the world. I can try, she said, her chin lifting in that stubborn way he was beginning to recognize. Miguel says the stew tastes like something from a restaurant in San Antonio, Ta said. It was the closest he could come to a compliment. Jessie flushed, a quick pink that rose up her neck. It needed salt and patience Miguel cooks like he is running from a fire. Taw looked at her. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the way she constantly scanned the horizon even while she worked. He recognized it because he felt it too. He walked through the town of Creekside with his head high, but his muscles were always coiled, waiting for the insult, the rock, or the bullet. They were two fugitives pretending to be householders. "We're going to town tomorrow," Taw said abruptly. "We need supplies, flour, coffee, and clothes for a dress that fits you." Jesse froze. "Town, is it safe? If we hide here, we look guilty," Taw said. "If we walk down the main street in broad daylight, we look like people with nothing to hide. It is a bluff." "Do you know how to bluff?" "Jesse." She looked at him, and for a moment, the terrified girl was gone, replaced by the woman who had smashed a decanter over a tyrant's head. "I am learning." The ride to Creekside took 3 hours. They took the buckboard wagon, with Jesse sitting stiffly beside Taw on the bench seat. Miguel stayed behind to guard the station. Creekside was busy for a weekday. Cowboys from the Rusk Ranch were loading supplies, and a few farmers were arguing over the price of seed. When Taw's wagon rolled onto the main thoroughfare, conversation died. It didn't taper off. It was severed. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. A woman sweeping the boardwalk stopped, her broom held like a weapon. Taw kept his eyes forward, his hands loose on the reins. He could feel Jessie radiating heat beside him, her spine as rigid as a rifle barrel. "Breathe," he murmured, his lips barely moving. "They want to smell your fear. Do not give it to them." They stopped in front of Henderson's general store. Taw jumped down and walked around to help Jessie. He offered his hand. She took it, her grip surprisingly strong. As she stepped down, her makeshift belt shifted, and for a second, she looked exactly what she was, a woman dressed in a man's cast-offs, living in a house that was not hers. "Well, look at this," a voice called out. It was a man leaning against a hitching post, wearing the dusty chaps of a Rusk hand. He spat a stream of tobacco juice near Taw's boot. The savage got himself a squaw, a white one, too. Jessie stiffened. Taw did not look at the man. He looked at Jessie. Inside. They entered the store. It was cool and smelled of spices, fabric, and vinegar. Mrs. Henderson, a stout woman with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, stood behind the counter. She wiped her hands on her apron, her eyes moving from Taw to Jessie with unrestrained curiosity. "Mr. Tawakoni," she said, her tone polite but guarded. "I didn't expect to see you until next month. We needed things," Taw said. "Mrs. Henderson, this is Jessie. She is helping me at the station." He did not say wife. Not yet. They had 30 days. Mrs. Henderson looked at Jessie over the rims of her spectacles. "Helping, that's a lonely place for a young woman. Miss, people are talking, saying all sorts of things." "Let them talk," Jessie said. Her voice was steady, though Taw saw her hands clench into fists at her sides. "I am working for my keep, Mrs. Henderson. Honest work, which is more than I can say for the men loitering outside your door." "Mrs." Henderson blinked, then a small, dry smile touched her lips. "Fair enough. What do you need, child?" "Calico," Jessie said. "Blue, if you have it, and thread, and 5 pounds of coffee." As they gathered the supplies, the door opened. Sheriff Harlan walked in. The badge on his chest was tarnished, much like the man himself. He took off his hat, nodding to Mrs. Henderson, but his eyes were on Taw. "Taw," Harlan said. "Step outside a minute." Taw looked at Jessie. "Stay here." Outside, the sun was blinding. Harlan leaned against the wall, lighting a pipe. "You are stirring the pot, son," Harlan said quietly. "Bringing a white girl out there living with her. You know what they are calling her, a whore? Or a captive? Folks are saying you stole her off a stagecoach." "She came to me," Taw said. "She needed work. I gave it to her." "It doesn't matter what the truth is." Harlan sighed, smoke curling around his weary face. "It matters what Colton Rusk can use. He was in my office yesterday asking about land surveys. asking if moral turpitude voids a land claim. You understand me. I understand he wants my water, Taw said. And he will use a woman's reputation to get it. He will use whatever weapon is at hand, Harlan warned. Watch your back, Taw, and watch hers. If she turns out to be a runaway with a price on her head, I can't help you. I won't help you. Taw met the sheriff's gaze. She is under my protection. That is Comanche law. Sheriff, it is older than yours. Harlan shook his head. Your law died 10 years ago. Son, you just haven't attended the funeral yet. The ride back was silent. The accusations hung in the air like dust. Whore. Captive. Jessie stared straight ahead, her jaw set. When they arrived back at the station, Aunt Sapa was waiting by the corral. She looked at Jessie, then at the bundles of cloth. She beckoned Jessie with a crooked finger. Jessie looked at Taw. He nodded. Go! She wants to teach you. Jessie followed the old woman into the small, brush-roofed shelter she preferred over the main cabin. It smelled of sage and drying meat. Aunt Sapa sat down and patted the earth beside her. Sit, Sapa said. Her English was broken, constructed of words she had traded for over the years. Jessie sat. She felt awkward, large and clumsy in the small space. Town people have loud mouths, Sapa said, handing Jessie a piece of dried fruit. Like crows. Caw, caw, caw. But crows do not kill the buffalo. They only eat what is left behind. They hate us, Jessie whispered. They looked at me like I was dirt. They look at you. They see the mirror, Sapa said. She touched Jessie's chest, right over her heart. They see freedom. They see women who do not obey. That scares them, so they call you names to make you small. Do not be small. Sapa picked up a strip of leather and began to braid it. Taw is a good man, but he carries a heavy stone. He thinks he must be white man to survive. He thinks paper protects him. Sapa laughed softly. Paper is just dry grass. Roots protect. Family protects. I am not his family, Jessie said. Sapa looked at her, her black eyes ancient and knowing. Not yet, but the wind blows people together. You learn to stand, girl. Learn to listen. The coyote does not fight the bear. The coyote watches. The coyote waits. Be the coyote. It was not the mystical wisdom Jessie had read about in novels. It was practical. It was survival. It was a lesson on how to exist in a world that wanted to consume you. Jessie took the leather strip and tried to mimic the braid. Her fingers were clumsy. But Sapa did not correct her. She just waited. 2 days later, the dust cloud appeared in the east. It was large, moving slowly. Cattle. A lot of them. Taw stood by the forge, his hammer hanging loose in his hand. Miguel limped out of the barn with a shotgun broken open over his arm. Jessie came out onto the porch, drying her hands on a rag. Colton Rusk rode at the head of the column. He was flanked by 4 riders. The cattle. Perhaps 200 head. Bald and kicked up dust behind them. They were dangerously close to the unfenced boundary of Taw's land. Rusk stopped his horse 10 yards from the forge. He was impeccable, his suit brushed, his boots polished. He looked like a king surveying a rebellious province. Afternoon. Tawakoni, Rusk said. He didn't dismount. You are off the trail. Rusk, Taw said. His voice was level, projecting easily over the noise of the cattle. The drover's road is 2 miles east. Grass is thin this year, Rusk said, shrugging. Cows go where the grass is, and they smell water. The water's mine, Taw said. Private property. You want to water 200 heads? The price is 10 cents a head. Rusk laughed. It was a cold sound. 10 cents. For water that God put in the ground, you have gotten greedy. Boy! Rusk's eyes shifted past Taw, up to the porch. He saw Jessie. His gaze lingered, slow and insolent, traveling from her boots to her face. So the rumors are true, Rusk said. You have a guest, or is it a prisoner? I am neither, Jessie said, stepping forward. Her heart was pounding, but Sapa's voice echoed in her head. Be the coyote. I am the housekeeper, and you are trespassing. Sir. Rusk raised an eyebrow. Educated. A housekeeper with the voice of a city girl. You are a long way from home. Miss, does your father know you are living with a... He paused, letting the silence fill with the unspoken slur. With him. My family knows exactly where I am. Jesse lied. And Mr. Tawakoni is a gentleman, which is more than I can say for a man who tries to intimidate his neighbors with cows. Rusk's face tightened. The amusement vanished. He looked back at Taw. This land is for white men. Taw, men who know how to use it, not for savages playing at farming. One day, you will make a mistake. You will forget to pay a tax, or you will lose a paper, or you will cross a line, and I will be there. He wheeled his horse around. Drive them east, he shouted to his men. The water here is tainted anyway. As they rode off, the dust choking the air, Taw did not move. He watched them until they were just silhouettes against the sun. He knows, Taw said softly. He does not know who you are, but he knows you are a weak point. Jessie turned and ran back into the cabin. She went straight to the corner where she had hidden her satchel under a loose floorboard. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. Paper protects, Taw had said. Paper is just dry grass, Sapa had said. She opened the bag. She pulled out the ledger she had stolen from Ambrose's desk. She had grabbed it because she thought it contained evidence of his gambling debts, proof she could use to shame him. But she hadn't looked closely. She flipped through the pages, numbers, dates, transactions, and then a folded map tucked into the back cover. She unfolded it on the table. It was a surveyor's map of the county. There was Creekside, there was the Rusk Ranch, and there was Taw's Station. But there were red lines drawn over the existing geography. A proposed dam upstream, a diversion channel that would bypass Taw's Spring entirely and funnel the water directly into Rusk's southern pasture. At the bottom of the map, there were two signatures. One was Colton Rusk. The other was Ambrose Thorne. The room spun. Ambrose wasn't just her stepfather. He was an investor. He was financing Rusk's expansion. The Indian agent in Austin that Rusk had mentioned Ambrose must have bought him too. This wasn't just about her running away. She had stolen the blueprint for their theft. She was carrying the proof of a conspiracy to dry out the entire valley and bankrupt Taw. The door opened. Taw walked in, dusting his hat. He stopped when he saw her face. What is it? He asked. Jessie pointed at the map. I have to leave, she choked out. Taw, I have to go tonight. We discussed this, Taw said, his voice hardening. You stay. You don't understand, Jessie cried. She shoved the map toward him. Look, it is my stepfather. He is working with Rusk. This map, they are going to dam the creek. They are going to steal your water legally before they even try to take the land. I brought this here. I brought the lightning rod right into your house. She grabbed her satchel. If they catch me here, they will find this. They will burn you down to get it. I have to take it away. She moved toward the door. Taw moved faster. He blocked her path. Grabbing her shoulders, his grip was firm, stopping her frantic momentum. Let me go, she shouted, struggling against him. I am destroying you. You are not destroying anything that was not already burning, Taw shouted back. His voice boomed in the small cabin, silencing her. He held her there, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were fierce, blazing with an intensity that pinned her in place. You think Rusk needed you to want my water? Taw asked, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. He has wanted it for 3 years. You think your stepfather needed an excuse to invest in Texas beef. They have been planning this long before you ran away in the night. You did not bring the war. Jessie, you just brought the map of the battlefield. Jessie trembled in his grasp. But now they have a reason to kill us both. They always had a reason, Taw said. Now we have a weapon. That map proves collusion. It proves intent to defraud the government water rights. He let go of her shoulders, but his hands lingered for a second on her arms. You are not a curse. Jessie, you are the only luck I have had in a long time. Jessie stared at him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her knees weak. She slumped against the table. I am scared. Taw, I am so scared. Good, Taw said. Fear keeps you awake. That night, the wind howled down from the north, a sudden cold front that promised the changing of seasons. The cabin was drafty. The fire had burned down to embers. Jessie lay on her pallet in the corner, wrapped in her thin blanket. She couldn't stop shivering. The chill was in her bones, a mixture of the weather and the terrifying revelation of the map. She heard Tom move. He slept by the door, a rifle within arm's reach, on a pile of buffalo hides. He stood up, a shadow in the darkness. He walked over to her. Jessie held her breath. He did not speak. He simply took the heavy buffalo robe from his own bedding and spread it over her. The weight of the fur was immediate, pressing down, trapping the warmth. As he smoothed the edge of the robe, his hand brushed against hers where she gripped the blanket. He stopped. His skin was rough, warm, and alive. Her hand was cold. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The contact was electric, a sudden current that jumped the gap between master and servant, between Comanche and white, between man and woman. It wasn't a sexual touch. It was something far more dangerous. It was an acknowledgement. "I see you. You are real." Jessie's breath hitched. She turned her hand, just a fraction, her fingers brushing his wrist. Taw pulled his hand back as if he had been burned. He stood up straight, backing away into the shadows. "Sleep?" he said, his voice raspy. "Tomorrow we have to hide the papers, and then we have to fight." He returned to his place by the door. Jessie lay under the heavy robe, the warmth seeping into her frozen limbs. She brought her hand up to her chest, pressing it against her heart where the memory of his touch still tingled. Outside, the wind screamed, but inside, the air had shifted. They were no longer just two people sharing a roof for survival. They were partners, and as Jessie closed her eyes, she realized that the terror of the day had been replaced by a different kind of fear, the fear of how much she wanted him to touch her again. The trip to Creekside was necessary, but it felt like walking into a cage filled with sleeping wolves. The buckboard wagon rattled over the hard-packed earth, the wheels groaning under the weight of the silence between Jessie and Tawakoni. Jessie wore the blue calico dress she had sewn over the last 3 nights. It was simple, high-collared, and fit her with a modesty that concealed the bruises of her journey, but it could not conceal the way she held her head. She scanned the horizon constantly, her eyes darting to every ridge and arroyo. "Stop looking," Taw said, his voice low. He did not look at her. His gaze was fixed on the ears of the mules. "A guilty dog barks at every shadow. You are not guilty. You are the station manager of Tawakoni's way station. Act like you own the ground you walk on." "I am trying," Jessie murmured. "But it is hard to feel like an owner when there is a price on my head." They rolled into Creekside just past noon. The town was agitated. There were more horses than usual tied at the hitching rails, and a group of men stood clustered around the notice board outside the sheriff's office. Taw pulled the wagon up to the mercantile. He jumped down and came around to assist her. As Jessie descended, her hand in his, she felt the eyes of the town on them. It was a physical weight, heavier than the heat. "Stay close," Taw said. They entered the general store. Mrs. Henderson was behind the counter, weighing sugar for a ranch hand. When she saw Jessie, her hands paused. She finished the transaction quickly, sending the cowboy on his way. "You should not have come today," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice a hushed whisper as she wiped the counter. "There are new posters up. Sheriff Harlan let them put them up this morning." Jessie's stomach dropped. "What do they say?" "They say Jessica Thorne," Mrs. Henderson said, looking directly at Jessie. "They say she stole $5,000 in bearer bonds and a gold watch. They say she is armed and dangerous." $5,000, Jessie breathed. It was a lie so magnificent it was almost impressive. Ambrose had inflated the crime to ensure every desperate man with a gun would be looking for her. "I took nothing but my own clothes and some papers." "The poster says thief," Taw said, his voice hard. "Paper does not make it true. It makes it true enough for the men drinking across the street." "Mrs. Henderson said. She reached under the counter and pulled out a small sack of peppermint candies, sliding them toward Jessie. It was a small, maternal gesture that nearly broke Jesse's composure. "If you need a place, child, the storeroom in the back has a lock. Rusk's men don't come in there." "Thank you," Jessie said, her voice trembling. "But we must get back. If we stay, we put you in danger." Taw nodded at the shopkeeper, a silent exchange of respect, and guided Jessie out. They had to pass the saloon to get to the wagon. The doors swung open, and the smell of stale beer and tobacco drifted out. 3 men stepped out, blocking the boardwalk. One of them was the man with the reedy voice, the bounty hunter. He held a piece of paper in his hand. He looked at the paper, then at Jessie. "Well now," the man said, a slow, unpleasant smile spreading across his face. "You look a lot cleaner than the description. Miss Thorne, but the eyes, those are the same." Taw stepped between them. He did not draw a weapon. He simply occupied the space, a wall of buckskin and muscle. "Move aside. Indian." The hunter sneered. "This doesn't concern you. That is $500 standing behind you." "She is my station manager," Taw said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but loud enough to carry. "She is under my employment and my protection." "She is a thief!" a voice shouted from the saloon porch. A local drunk swayed there, emboldened by the hunters. "And you are just a savage hiding a criminal." The hunter took a step forward, his hand hovering near his holster. "I am taking her. You try to stop me, and I will add a dead Comanche to my tally for the day." Jessie saw Taw's hand twitch. It was a microscopic movement, the reflex of a warrior who could draw his knife and open the man's throat before the hunter could clear leather. She saw the rage ripple through his back muscles, but he did not move. If he fought, the sheriff would have to arrest him, if he was arrested. Jessie was alone. If he killed a white man in the middle of town, the mob would hang him before sunset. Taw slowly raised his empty hands, palms out. "I am unarmed," Taw said clearly. "I am a citizen with a business. If you touch her, you are assaulting an employee of a federal mail outpost. Is that not right?" Sheriff Harlan had stepped out of his office, a double-barreled shotgun resting comfortably in the crook of his arm. "That is technically correct," Harlan drawled. He looked at the bounty hunter. "And unless you have a warrant signed by a judge in this county, Mr. S. Thorne, you can't just snatch folks off the street. We have procedures." The hunter spat on the ground, missing Taw's boot by an inch. "I will get the warrant. It will take me 2 days to ride to the county seat. Don't think you can run, girl. I know where you roost." Taw lowered his hands. He turned to Jessie. "Get in the wagon." He did not look back at the men. He climbed up, took the reins, and drove them out of town with a deliberate, maddening slowness. 5 miles out of town, the sky began to change. The blue bleached out, replaced by a sickly, bruised yellow. The wind died completely. The silence was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. "Blue norther," Taw said, snapping the reins. "Hold on. What is it?" Jessie asked, looking at the wall of darkness rising in the north. It looked like a mountain range moving across the plains, swallowing the world. "Dust storm," Taw said. "A bad one. We are too far from the station." He drove the mules hard, veering off the road toward a cluster of limestone formations. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in a minute. The first gust hit them like a physical blow, rocking the wagon on its springs. Then the world vanished. The dust didn't just blow, it screamed. It filled the air so completely that Jessie couldn't see the mules. Sand scoured her skin, stinging like 1,000 needles. She pulled her shawl over her face, gasping for air, but the air was solid grit. "Get down," Taw shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar. The wagon hit a hidden rut, with a sickening crack of wood. It tipped. Jessie was thrown clear, tumbling into the blinding brown darkness. She hit the ground hard, the wind rolling her over and over. She tried to stand, but the wind knocked her down. She couldn't breathe. The dust clogged her nose, her throat. Panic, cold and primal, seized her. She was drowning on dry land. A hand gripped her arm. It was Taw. He had wrapped a heavy scarf around his face. leaving only his eyes, visible eyes that were narrowed against the grit but calm. He pulled her up, wrapping his arm around her waist, anchoring her against the wind. He didn't try to speak. He dragged her toward the rocks. They stumbled, fell, and crawled. Jessie felt her lungs burning. She was coughing, but every inhale brought more dust. Ta pulled her into a shallow fissure in the rock face, a small cave barely large enough for 2 people. He pushed her all the way to the back, then positioned himself at the opening, using his broad back as a shield against the fury of the storm. It was dark inside, and hot. Jessie was hyperventilating, her chest heaving. Ta turned to her. He pulled a canteen from his shoulder. He had managed to grab it from the wagon. He uncorked it and soaked his large cotton bandana. "Breathe," he commanded, pressing the wet cloth over her nose and mouth. The moisture was a miracle. It trapped the dust. Jessie inhaled greedily, the cool water vapor soothing her raw throat. I can't," she stammered, shaking violently. "You are alive," Ta said. He moved closer, pressing her against the cold stone wall. There was no space for modesty. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest to share body heat as the temperature outside continued to plummet. Jessie buried her face in his buckskin shirt. She could smell the sage, the sweat, and the underlying scent of him, something earthy and solid. He was the only steady thing in a disintegrating world. "They want to kill me," she sobbed into his chest, the fear of the town finally breaking loose. "They called me a thief." "You are not a thief," Ta said, his voice rumbling against her ear. He stroked her hair, his hand large and rough but incredibly gentle. "You are a warrior who stole the enemy's battle plans. There is a difference." "Why didn't you hit him?" Jessie asked, pulling back slightly to look at his eyes in the gloom. "In the town, you wanted to. If I hit him, I lose," Ta said. "I am a Comanche in a white man's town. I have to be twice as good to be considered half as human. My anger is a luxury I cannot afford. Jessie, not if I want to keep my land. Not if I want to keep you safe." Jessie looked at him. She realized then the immense cost of his dignity. Every day was a battle of restraint. "You are a better man than any of them," she whispered. Ta looked at her. The wet cloth had slipped from her face. Her lips were cracked, her face streaked with dust and tears, in the darkness of the cave, with the storm howling outside. The social distance between them evaporated. He leaned his forehead against hers. "I am just a man who needs his wife to breathe." He didn't kiss her. He held her gaze for a long, charged moment, then pulled the wet cloth back over her face. "Rest. The wind will die by morning." The storm broke just before dawn, leaving the world reshaped in drifts of brown sand. They walked the 3 miles back to the station, leading the bruised mules. The wagon was left behind to be salvaged later. By the time they reached the cabin, Jessie was burning up. The dust pneumonia, the brown lung, was a killer. But for Jessie, it was exhaustion and shock manifesting as a high fever. She collapsed on the porch. Ta carried her inside. He laid her on his own bed, the only one with a proper mattress. He barked orders at Miguel in Spanish, sending him for fresh water and willow bark. For 2 days, Jessie drifted in and out of delirium. She dreamed of St. Louis. She dreamed of Ambrose Thorne standing over her with a belt, but every time the nightmare closed in, a cool hand would touch her forehead, and the darkness would recede. She woke up on the 3rd night. The room was lit by a single oil lamp, casting long, dancing shadows on the log walls. The air smelled of eucalyptus steam. Ta was sitting in a chair by the bed, his head bowed, asleep. Jessie moved her hand. She felt weak, hollowed out, but clear-headed. She looked at Ta. He looked exhausted. There was soot under his eyes, and his shirt was unlaced at the throat. She reached out and touched his hand, which rested on the edge of the mattress. He woke instantly. His hand turned over, catching hers, his grip strong and reassuring. "You are back," he said softly. "Did I die?" Jessie asked, her voice a rasp. "You tried. Taw said, a faint smile touching his lips. But Aunt Sapa said you were too stubborn for the spirits to take. He stood and poured a cup of water from a pitcher. He supported her head so she could drink. The intimacy of the act, his arm behind her neck, the cup at her lips made her heart hammer a slow, heavy rhythm. "The papers," Jessie whispered. "The satchel." "I have them," Taw said. He set the cup down. He reached under the bed and pulled out the leather bag. He took out the map and the ledger. "I read them while you slept," he said. His face grew serious. "I learned to read English from a Bible and a treatise on contract law. I understand what this says." He spread the map on the blanket over her knees. "Here." He pointed to a dotted line. "This is a diversion dam. It is illegal under the Water Rights Act of 1875. But here," he pointed to a signature, "is the signature of the Indian agent, approving it as a reclamation project." "And Ambrose?" Jessie asked. "Ambrose Thorne is the silent partner." Taw said, "He puts up the money for the dam. Rusk provides the land. The agent provides the permit. Once the water is diverted, my station dries up. I cannot water horses. I lost my mail contract. I default on my taxes. They buy the land at auction for pennies. It is a perfect trap," Jessie said bitterly. "It is," Taw agreed. "But they made a mistake. They wrote it down." He looked at Jessie. "This ledger proves that the agent was paid $3,000 by your stepfather. That is bribery. It is a federal crime." "So we take it to the sheriff?" Jessie asked. "Harlan is a good man, but he is one man." Taw said, "If we give him this now, Rusk will kill him. We need more." Taw stood up and paced the small room. The energy was back in him, the restless, predator energy. "Rusk thinks you are just a runaway," Taw said. "He does not know you have the book. He thinks you just have family secrets. That is our advantage." He stopped and looked down at her. The lamplight caught the sharp angles of his face, making him look beautiful and dangerous. "The bounty hunter will return with a warrant," Taw said. "Maybe in 2 days, maybe 3. When he comes, he will have the law behind him. He will have the right to search. He will have the right to take you." Jessie felt the cold seep back into her bones. "So I have to run?" "No," Taw said. He sat on the edge of the bed again. He took both her hands in his. His skin was rough against her palms. "I told you I needed a wife," he said. "I told you it was for the land. That was true. But it is not enough anymore." Jessie stopped breathing. "If you are my employee, I can only protect you so far." Taw said, "If you are my wife, my legal wife, under the laws of Texas, you cannot be extradited to Missouri without a hearing. A husband has the right to challenge the transport of his spouse. It buys us time. It forces them to fight in a courtroom, not in the dark." "You want to marry me to stop the warrant?" Jessie asked. "I want to marry you because you are the only person who has ever stood in the dirt with me and not looked for a way out," Taw said. His voice was raw. "I want to marry you because when the storm came, I did not want to save myself. I wanted to save you." He squeezed her hands. "I am not asking for a fake marriage anymore, Jessie. I am asking for a real one, a partnership, blood and bone. If we do this, there is no going back. You will be Tawakoni's wife. The town will hate you. Your family will disown you, but you will never be alone again." Jessie looked at him. She saw the man who had cleaned her wounds, who had shielded her body with his own in the rocks, who had swallowed his pride in town to keep her safe. She had sworn never to let a man own her again, but Taw wasn't asking to own her. He was asking her to stand beside him. She looked at the map on her knees, the proof of the men who wanted to destroy them. Then she looked at Taw. "If we do this," Jessie said softly, "we do not just fight for time. We fight to win." "Yes," Taw said. "We take them all down." Jessie did not say yes immediately. The word was too big, too final, but she did not pull her hands away. She let her fingers interlace with his, gripping him back with a strength that surprised them both. "Get the Bible. Taw," she whispered. "And get Miguel. We have a war to plan." Outside, the wind had stopped. leaving a silence that was not empty, but waiting. The peace of the dawn was a lie. Jessie sat at the rough-hewn table, the ledger open before her. The oil lamp flickered low, casting long, nervous shadows against the log walls. Opposite her, Tawakoni cleaned his rifle. The rhythmic snick-click of the lever action was the only sound in the room. It was a sound of preparation, of a man who knew that the storm outside had passed only to make way for a different kind of violence. "They will come at first light," Taw said. He did not look up from the weapon. Rusk likes an audience. He will want the sun up so everyone can see him evict the savage. "We have the evidence," Jessie said, her hand resting on the leather cover of the book. "The map, the bribery payments. It is all here. Evidence is only good if you live long enough to present it," Taw replied. He set the rifle down and looked at her. His eyes were dark, rimmed with the fatigue of a man who had not slept in 2 days. "When the trouble starts, Miguel will take the horses out the back. You go with him. Ride for the canyon. Do not stop until you hit the caprock." Jessie closed the book. The thud was soft but final. "No," Taw frowned. "This is not a negotiation." "Jessie, I promised to protect you. And you asked me to be a partner," she countered. She stood up, her legs trembling slightly, but her voice steady. "If I run, I am just the thief they say I am. If I run, they burn this station to the ground and you with it. I am staying." Before Taw could argue, the sound of a gunshot shattered the stillness. It came from the ridge, a sharp, cracking report that echoed across the flatlands. Then came the shouting. "Fire!" Miguel yelled from outside. "They set the hay barn on fire!" Taw was moving before the echo died. He kicked the door open. Staying low, Jessie grabbed the satchel, shoved the ledger inside, and followed him. The yard was chaotic. A wagon filled with burning pitch had been rolled against the side of the barn. The dry wood was catching fast, orange flames licking up toward the dark sky. Beyond the firelight, shadows moved on horseback, a dozen men, maybe more. "Come out, Tawakoni!" It was Colton Rusk's voice. He sat on a massive gray gelding near the gate. Illuminated by the flames, he was flanked by men holding torches. Behind him, Jessie saw the glint of badges, not just Sheriff Harlan, but deputies she did not recognize. And further back, the black carriage of the Indian agent. "We found the stolen saddles! Taw!" Rusk shouted, his voice thick with performative outrage. "Right where my men said they would be, in your corral. You have been raiding my supply lines." It was a clumsy frame-up, but effective. Rusk wasn't just bringing a mob. He was bringing a militia. "Get Aunt Sapa," Taw ordered Miguel. "Get her to the creek bed! Go!" Miguel sprinted toward the old woman's hut. Taw turned to Jessie. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip hard. "The root cellar," he commanded. "Now." "No," Jessie said. She pulled away from him. "They are here for a show. Taw, let us give them one." She stepped off the porch. "Jessie," Taw hissed, reaching for her. But she was already moving into the yard. The heat from the burning barn was intense, flushing her cheeks. She walked until she stood beside the water trough, the firelight catching the blue of her dress and the defiant set of her jaw. She clutched the satchel to her chest. "You are trespassing! Mr. Rusk!" Jessie shouted. Her voice was not the high, frightened thing it had been a week ago. It was a bell, ringing clear over the crackle of the fire. Rusk wheeled his horse. He looked surprised to see her, then pleased. Well, Rusk sneered. "The little lady. I have someone here who has been looking for you." A man separated from the group of riders. It was the bounty hunter with the reedy voice. He dismounted, a pair of iron shackles dangling from his hand. "Jessica Thorne," the hunter said, walking toward her with a predatory grin. "You are coming with me. Your daddy wants his watch back." "I have no father," Jessie said. She did not back away. "And my name is Jessie Keller." "Grab her," Rusk ordered. "And arrest the Indian for theft and harboring a fugitive." The bounty hunter lunged. Taw hit him like a thunderbolt. He had come off the porch in a blur of motion. He didn't use a weapon. He used his shoulder, driving into the hunter's midsection and lifting the man off his feet. They slammed into the dust. The hunter scrambled for his pistol, but Taw was faster. He pinned the man's wrist to the ground and drove a knee into his chest. The click of hammers cocking echoed around the yard. A dozen rifles were trained on Taw. "Stand down," Sheriff Harlan's voice boomed. The sheriff rode forward, his shotgun leveled not at Taw, but at the space between the combatants. "Nobody shoots unless I say so." "He assaulted a lawful agent," Rusk shouted. "Shoot him!" "I said stand down," Harlan roared. "This is my county, Rusk, and I will not have a massacre on my watch." Taw stood up slowly, backing away from the gasping hunter. He moved to stand in front of Jessie, placing his body between her and the guns. "You accuse me of theft," Taw said, his voice calm and cold. "Where is your proof?" "My men found Rusk Ranch saddles in your barn," Rusk said, gesturing to the burning building. "Of course, it is a pity the fire will destroy them. But the intent is clear." "The only thing clear," Jessie said, stepping out from behind Taw, "is that you are a liar, Colton Rusk." A murmur went through the posse. Jessie opened her satchel. She pulled out the heavy ledger. "What is that?" Rusk asked, his eyes narrowing. "This," Jessie said, holding the book high, "is the private ledger of Ambrose Thorne, my stepfather, and your business partner." The door of the black carriage opened. A man in a dusty suit stepped out. It was the Indian agent, a man named Miller. He looked pale in the firelight. "That girl is hysterical," Miller shouted. "She is a mental patient. Seize her." "I'm perfectly sane," Jessie said. She walked toward the sheriff, ignoring the guns pointed at her. "Sheriff Harlan, do you know what a diversion dam is?" Harlan looked at her, then at the book. "I know it is illegal to block a natural water source." "Page 42, Jessie said, opening the book with steady hands. "May 15th, 1880. $3,000 paid to Agent Miller for topographical adjustments to the section maps. And here," she flipped a page, "a letter from Mr. Rusk to Mr. Thorne, outlining the plan to frame Tawakoni for cattle rustling to void his land claim." "Lies!" Miller screamed. He fumbled inside his coat. "That is a forgery." "It is signed," Jessie said, thrusting the book toward Mrs. Henderson, who had arrived in a wagon behind the sheriff's posse. "Mrs. Henderson, you know my stepfather's signature. You handled his bank drafts when he came through town last month." Mrs. Henderson climbed down from her wagon. She was a formidable woman, and the men parted for her. She took the book. She adjusted her spectacles and looked at the page. The silence stretched, broken only by the roar of the fire. "It is Ambrose Thorne's signature," Mrs. Henderson announced loudly. "And this is Colton Rusk's handwriting. I have seen enough of his bad checks to know the scrawl." "That proves nothing," Rusk shouted, but his horse danced nervously beneath him. "Give me that book." "No," Taw said. Taw stepped forward. He did not look like a savage. He looked like a king in buckskin. "That book is evidence in a federal crime, attempted fraud, bribery of a government official, and conspiracy to incite violence." Agent Miller pulled a small pistol from his coat. "I will not let a squaw and a savage ruin me." He aimed at Jessie. "Drop it!" Sheriff Harlan yelled, swinging his shotgun. But it wasn't the sheriff who stopped him. It was the bounty hunter, the man on the ground, humiliated and bruised, saw the tide turning. He saw a federal agent about to commit murder in front of 20 witnesses. He realized that if Jessie died, his $500 reward died with her. The hunter kicked Miller's legs out from under him. The gun went off, the bullet kicking up dirt 2 feet from Jessie's hem. Miller fell. Before he could rise, Taw was there. He kicked the gun away and hauled the agent up by his lapels. "I should kill you," Taw whispered, his face inches from Miller's. "For the years you tried to starve my people, for the lies," Miller whimpered, his feet dangling off the ground. Taw looked at Rusk. Rusk was backing his horse away, his hand drifting to his holster. "Don't do it, Colton," Sheriff Harlan said, leveling his shotgun at the cattle baron. You are rich, but you are not bulletproof. Taw dropped Miller in the dust. He turned to Rusk. Get off your horse. Taw said, You cannot order me. Rusk spat. I am not ordering you. Taw said, I am placing you under citizen's arrest for arson, for filing false reports, and for trespassing on private property. Rusk looked at his men. Kill him. What are you waiting for? I will pay your wages. The men looked at the sheriff. They looked at Mrs. Henderson, who stood with her arms crossed, judging them. They looked at the burning barn and the ledger in the girl's hands. One by one, they lowered their rifles. It is over, Mr. Rusk, the foreman said. I signed on to punch cows, not to hang for treason. Rusk stared at them, his face turning a mottled purple. He looked at Jesse, hate radiating from him like heat. You, he hissed. You little witch. You think this is over? Your father has lawyers who will bury you. Let them come, Jessie said. Her voice shook, but she stood tall. We have the truth, and we have the map. Sheriff Harlan rode up to Rusk. Get down, Colton, before I have to shoot you off that saddle. Rusk dismounted slowly. A deputy moved forward to take his gun. The bounty hunter stood up, brushing dust from his coat. He looked at Jesse, then at Taw. I still have a warrant, he said sullenly. She is a runaway. She is my wife, Taw said. The words stopped the air in the yard. Jesse looked at him. By common law, Taw continued, his voice ringing out. She has lived under my roof for 30 days. She has worked my land. We are betrothed, under Texas statutes. You cannot remove a woman from her husband's county without a hearing in a district court. He looked at the sheriff. Is that not right? Harlan. Harlan scratched his jaw, hiding a smile. Well, it is a bit of a gray area, Taw, but given the circumstances, and seeing as how the plaintiff in the warrant is currently implicated in a federal conspiracy, I would say this warrant is about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. Harlan looked at the hunter. You are under arrest too, son, for assault and attempted kidnapping. I am sure the judge will sort it all out in, maybe 6 months. The hunter slumped. Miguel, Taw shouted. The fire! The bucket brigade started. The threat of violence had broken, replaced by the urgent, practical work of saving the station. Jessie stood by the water trough, her knees suddenly turning to water. The adrenaline was leaving her, replaced by a shaking exhaustion. She watched Rusk and Miller being loaded into the sheriff's wagon. She watched Mrs. Henderson guarding the ledger like a bulldog. She felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned. Taw stood there. His face was smeared with soot, his chest heaving. You didn't run, he said. It was a statement of wonder. I couldn't, Jessie said. You were here. Taw looked at the burning barn, then back at her. The chaos of the night was fading into the gray light of pre-dawn. They will come back, Taw said. Lawyers, judges, your stepfather. This is not the end. I know, Jessie said. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers interlaced with hers, tight and secure. If you choose to stay, Taw said, his voice low and fierce. You are not alone, not anymore. I am not going anywhere, Jessie whispered. Husband, the word hung between them, heavy and real. The sun began to crest the horizon, painting the smoke-filled sky in brilliant streaks of pink and gold. The barn was a loss, a skeleton of black timber against the light, but the house stood. The windmill turned slowly in the morning breeze, and at the center of it, holding hands amidst the ashes of their enemies, the Comanche and the girl from St. Louis stood their ground. The smoke from the burning barn had long since dissipated into the endless Texas sky, but the scent of charred wood lingered for weeks, a ghost that refused to be exorcised. In the days following the arrest of Colton Rusk and Agent Miller, the atmosphere at Tawakoni's way station shifted from one of siege to one of grim, determined reconstruction. The victory was not the clean, triumphant ending of a dime novel. It was messy, it was bureaucratic, and it was exhausting. Sheriff Harlan had taken Rusk into custody, but a cattle baron did not stay behind bars easily. Rusk was out on bail within 48 hours. Though he was confined to his ranch pending a federal inquiry, the evidence in the ledger, the bribery, the falsified maps, the conspiracy was too damning to be swept aside, even by money. A federal marshal arrived from Austin, a man with a handlebar mustache and eyes like flint, to take custody of the documents. For Jessie, the process of exoneration was a slow, grinding wheel. She was not instantly hailed as a hero. To many in Creekside, she was still the woman who had brought trouble to their doorstep. She spent hours in the back of the sheriff's office, giving depositions, writing out statements until her hand cramped. "You understand, Miss Keller," the marshal said, tapping his pen on the desk, "that even if your stepfather is guilty of fraud, you technically did steal the ledger. It is property." "I recovered evidence of a felony in progress," Jessie replied, her voice steady. She sat straight in the hard wooden chair, no longer the trembling girl who had hidden in the rocks. "If I had not taken it, this entire valley would be dry by next summer. You can charge me with theft, Marshal, but you will have to explain to a jury why you are prosecuting a whistleblower while the criminals drink tea in their parlors." The marshal had looked at her, then at the sheriff. He closed his notebook. "We will call it protective custody of material witness documents. For now." It was a small victory, but it felt like breathing for the first time in months. Tawakoni fought a different battle. The physical threat was gone, but the paper war had just begun. He spent his days with surveyors, rewalking the property lines, verifying the water rights, ensuring that every inch of his land was documented and unassailable. He realized that the freedom he had fought for, the right to be left alone, was an illusion. True freedom, he found, required commitment. It meant standing in the county clerk's office and demanding the respect due to a taxpayer. It meant hiring a lawyer from San Antonio to file injunctions against Rusk's estate. One afternoon, as Ta was setting a new fence post near the creek, Miguel limped over with a water skin. "They say Rusk is selling the southern herd," Miguel said, wiping sweat from his brow, "to pay for his defense." "He will sell more than cows before this is over," Ta said, driving the post into the earth with a heavy sledgehammer. "The town is quiet," Miguel observed. "When I went for supplies, men tipped their hats. They did not spit. It is strange." "They are embarrassed," Ta said. "They followed a liar, and they nearly burned down an honest man's house because of it." Shame is a quiet emotion. "Miguel, and you?" Miguel asked. "Are you going to leave now that the water is safe?" Ta stopped hammering. He looked at the cabin where smoke was rising from the chimney. He looked at the patch of garden where Jessie was weeding, her blue dress a bright spot against the brown earth. "Runners run," Ta said. "Builders stay. I am done running. Miguel, I want to build something that cannot be burned down." Miguel smiled, a gold tooth flashing. "Then I will stay too. Someone has to make sure you do not shoe a horse backward." "I need a partner," Ta said seriously, "not a hand." 20% of the station's profit, and your name on the business license." Miguel stared at him, his mouth opening slightly. 20%. That is generous." "Ta." "It is fair," Ta said. "You stood with a shotgun when the rest of the world brought torches. Loyalty is expensive." For Jessie, the days were filled with work, but the nights were still a battlefield. The adrenaline that had sustained her during the siege had faded, leaving behind the raw, jagged edges of her trauma. She woke 3 nights in a row screaming, her sheets soaked in sweat, the memory of Ambrose Thorne's face looming over her in the dark. On the 4th night, she did not go back to sleep. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and went outside. She found Aunt Sapa sitting by the embers of the outdoor fire, smoking a small pipe. The old woman patted the log beside her. Jessie sat down, the silence between them comfortable. "The bad dreams chase you," Sapa said softly. "They won't stop," Jessie whispered. "He is hundreds of miles away. I know he cannot hurt me, but when I close my eyes, I am back in that house. I hear his footsteps." "Fear is a shadow," Sapa said, blowing a ring of smoke into the night air. When the sun is behind you, the shadow is long. It looks like a giant, but it is just you blocking the light. Sapa reached out and took Jessie's hand. Her skin was like dry parchment, warm and fragile. You must name the fear, Sapa said. Do not call it him. Do not call it monster. Call it what it is. A small, greedy man who lost a memory that has no teeth. I feel broken, Jessie confessed. Ta, he is so strong. He stands like a rock. I feel like I am made of glass. Sapa chuckled, a low, rasping sound. Ta is not a rock. He is a tree. He bends in the wind. That is why he does not break. And you are not glass. Child, you are iron. You went through the fire. Now you are hard, but iron takes a long time to cool. She squeezed Jessie's hand. Give it time. The heat will leave, and you will see that the shape you are now is stronger than the shape you were before. The community of Creekside began to make amends in the only way they knew how, with labor and food. 2 weeks after the fire, a convoy of wagons arrived at the station. It was Mrs. Henderson, leading a group of men from the church. They brought lumber, nails, and tools. We heard you needed a new barn, Mrs. Henderson said, climbing down from her wagon. She looked at Ta, her chin high, daring him to refuse the charity. And the ladies' auxiliary baked pies, apple and peaches. Ta stood on the porch, Jessie beside him. He looked at the men, some of whom had been in the posse that night. They looked at their boots, shuffling awkwardly. We appreciate the help, Ta said finally. He did not smile, but his voice was not cold. It was the voice of a man accepting a peace offering. The barn raising took 3 days. It was hard work, filled with the sounds of hammers and saws. Jessie worked alongside the women, serving lemonade and food. She noticed the change in how they looked at her. The whispers of whore and thief were gone, replaced by a cautious curiosity and, in some cases, admiration. Is it true you stood up to Colton Rusk? A young woman asked as Jessie poured her tea. That you called him a liar to his face? I just told the truth, Jessie said. The truth is loud when everything else is quiet. On the final day, Sheriff Harlan rode out. He tied his horse and walked up to where Ta was inspecting the new roof beams. Looks solid, Harlan said. It is better than the old one. Ta agreed. Harlan took off his hat and wiped the band. He looked older, more tired than usual. I owe you an apology. Ta, I let Rusk push me. I let the town push me. I should have stopped it sooner. You stopped it when it mattered, Ta said. Maybe, Harlan said. But a lawman shouldn't wait until the bullet is in the chamber to do his job. I am retiring. Ta, end of the month. I think the town needs someone younger, someone who doesn't owe so many favors. He put his hat back on. And about the girl, Jessie. She is a fine woman. You were right to protect her. She protected herself. Ta corrected him. I just stood next to her. Harlan nodded. He mounted his horse and rode away, a man making peace with his own failures. The final ghost of the past arrived a week later. It was not Ambrose Thorne. The coward would never come himself. It was a lawyer, a man named Mr. Percival, dressed in a suit that cost more than the entire station. He arrived in a rented carriage, dusting his lapels with a look of distaste as he stepped onto the dirt of the yard. Jessie was feeding the chickens. Ta was in the smithy. They both stopped as the man approached. Miss Jessica Thorne, the lawyer asked, consulting a document. Jessie Keller, she corrected him, walking to the fence. She did not open the gate. I represent your stepfather, Mr. Ambrose Thorne, Percival said, his voice oily and condescending. He is distressed by the recent events. However, he is a man of family values. He is willing to drop all charges of theft and overlook your indiscretions if you return to St. Louis immediately. He is even willing to provide a dowry for a suitable marriage back east, to hush up this unfortunate chapter. Ta walked out of the smithy. He held a heavy iron bar in his hand. Though he did not raise it, he simply stood behind Jessie, a silent, looming presence. And if I refuse, Jesse asked. Then he will pursue the theft charges to the fullest extent of the law, Percival said. He will drag your name through the mud. He will make sure you spend the next 10 years in a penitentiary. Jesse looked at the lawyer. She thought of Sapa's words. Name the fear. Mr. Percival, Jesse said, her voice calm and cold. Please inform Mr. Thorne that the federal marshal in Austin currently holds his personal ledger, the one detailing his bribes. If he wishes to pursue charges against me, I will be happy to testify in open court about where that money came from and where it went. The lawyer's face paled slightly. That is blackmail. It is justice, Jesse said. And tell him this, I am not his daughter. I am not his property. I am a citizen of Texas, and I am home. If he ever sends another man to this land, he will not be met with words. She pointed to the road. Now, get off my property. The lawyer looked at Jesse, then at Taw, and finally at the open expanse of the savage, unforgiving land that these two seemed to fit into so perfectly. He realized he had no power here. His threats were paper tigers in a windstorm. He turned and practically ran to his carriage. Jesse watched him go. She felt a weight lift off her shoulders, a physical release of tension that made her knees weak. She leaned against the fence. Taw stepped up beside her. He did not touch her, but his presence was a warm wall against her back. He will not come back, Taw said. No, Jesse agreed. He won't. That evening, the air was cool and sweet, smelling of rain on the horizon. The station was quiet. Miguel and Sapa had retired to their quarters. Jesse and Taw sat on the porch steps. They watched the fireflies dancing in the tall grass. A lantern burned low between them, casting a soft, golden circle of light. It is over, Jesse said softly. The 30 days, the deal. Yes, Taw said. He rested his elbows on his knees, looking out at the darkness. You are free to go. Jesse, you have no warrants. You could go to Austin. Or California. Is that what you want? Jesse asked. She turned to look at him. Taw turned his head. His eyes were dark, unguarded for the first time since she had met him. You know what I want, but I am not a man who keeps things in cages. You stayed because you had to. Now you have a choice. I stayed because I had to, Jesse admitted. But I fought because I wanted to. There is a difference. She moved her hand, covering his where it rested on the step. His skin was warm, the calluses familiar to her now. I never thought I would find a home here, she said. I thought this place was hell when I first saw it, dust and wind and thorns. It is still dust and wind and thorns, Taw said. Yes, Jesse smiled. But it is our dust. Taw turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. He pulled her gently closer. Jesse leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but the intimacy of it was profound. She felt the steady rhythm of his breathing, the solid strength of his arm. He lifted his other hand and brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead. His touch was incredibly tender, a stark contrast to the violence he was capable of. He traced the line of her jaw with his thumb. I have nothing to offer you but hard work, Taw said quietly, and a house that people will always look at sideways. I am not afraid of work, Jesse said. She looked up at him, her face inches from his. And I don't care where people look, I only care where you look. Taw leaned down. He did not kiss her on the lips. He pressed his lips to her forehead, a lingering, reverent seal of protection and affection. It was sexier than any passionate embrace, because it promised something longer lasting than desire. It promised devotion. Then stay, he whispered against her skin. The next morning, as the sun painted the sky in violent purples and soft pinks, Taw found Jesse by the water trough. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a ring. It was not gold. It was silver, hammered by hand, with a small, rough turquoise stone set in the center, the stone of the sky and water. I made this, he said. Last night, in the forge. Jesse took it. It was still warm from his pocket. It was imperfect, heavy, and beautiful. It is not a diamond from St. Louis, Taw said. No, Jessie said, sliding it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. It is better. It is real. Ta took her hands. The first time I asked you, I asked for a servant. Then I asked for a shield. I was wrong both times. He looked her in the eye. Jessie Keller, will you be my wife, not for the law, not for the land, but for me? Will you build this life with me? Jessie looked at the ring, then at the man who had given her back her name and her courage. She saw the years stretching out ahead of them, hard years, perhaps, but years filled with freedom and truth. Yes, she said, I will. They stood together as the sun cleared the horizon, bathing the station in light. The wind kicked up, rustling the dry grass, but neither of them flinched. They were rooted now, deep in the earth, ready for whatever season came next. The morning sun had fully risen, burning off the last of the dew, but the air remained cool with the promise of autumn. Jessie looked at the silver ring on her finger, then up at Tawakoni. The proposal hung in the air, a question that had already been answered by her heart, but needed to be ratified by her mind. I said yes, Jessie repeated, her voice gaining strength. But you should know what you are acquiring. Ta, you are not getting a silent partner. I will not sit in the corner and mend shirts while you decide our future. If we build this life, we build it brick by brick, together. I handle the ledgers. I handle the correspondence. And when the cattlemen try to cheat us on the water price, I will be the one standing at the gate. Ta smiled. It was a rare expression, one that crinkled the corners of his dark eyes and softened the harsh planes of his face. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over the rough turquoise stone. I would expect nothing less, he said. A silent wife would be of no use to me. I need a voice that can be heard over the wind. Then we have a deal, Jessie said. She did not pull her hand away. And a marriage. The wedding took place 2 weeks later. It was not the grand cathedral affair Jessie had once imagined as a girl in St. Louis, with silk trains and organ music. It was something far more real. They stood beneath the great oak tree near the creek, the only spot of deep shade on the property. A circuit preacher, a dusty man named Reverend Thomas, who rode a mule and carried a Bible wrapped in oilcloth, officiated the ceremony. The guest list was a testament to the shifting tides of the valley. Miguel stood as Ta's best man, wearing a clean white shirt and a vest he had polished until it shone. Aunt Sapa sat in a chair of honor, wrapped in a ceremonial blanket, her eyes sharp and approving. Mrs. Henderson was there, wearing her Sunday best, standing alongside Sheriff Harlan, who had pinned his badge on straight for the occasion. Even a few of the townspeople from Creekside had come. They stood at the back, hats in hands, their presence a silent admission of error. They had brought food-roasted venison, corn pudding, and jars of preserved peaches, an offering of peace to the man they had once tried to burn out. The ceremony was a weaving of two worlds. The Reverend read from the Book of Ruth, his voice booming over the sound of the wind. Whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Then Aunt Sapa rose. She approached the couple, burning a bundle of white sage. She wafted the smoke over them, chanting a low prayer in the Comanche tongue, asking the spirits of the earth and sky to bind their paths. She tied a leather cord around their joined hands, knotting it 3 times, once for the past, once for the present, and once for the future. When Ta kissed her, it was not tentative. It was a claim and a promise. The cheers that went up from the small crowd were genuine, carrying across the open plains. Life at the station settled into a new rhythm, one defined not by fear, but by industry. The station was no longer just a place to water horses. It became a hub of the community. Jessie took over the main cabin's front room. She cleared out the old tack and set up a long table. She nailed a slate board to the wall. It began with 2 children from a nearby homestead, sent by their mother to learn their letters. Within a month, there were 6 children. 3 evenings a week, grown cowboys sat on the benches, their large hands struggling with pencils as Jessie taught them how to sign their names and calculate their wages so they could not be cheated by dishonest foremen. She taught them that words were weapons, sharper than knives and longer reaching than rifles. She saw the light come into a man's eyes when he read a newspaper for the first time, and she knew she was building something more permanent than a fortress. She was building a future. Ta worked the land. With the water rights secured and the threat of rust gone, he expanded the corral. He built a new forge, larger and better equipped. He established a reputation for fairness that spread all the way to the Pecos River. Travelers knew that at Tawakoni's station, the water was clean, the horses were sound, and the price was fixed. There was no haggling, and there was no prejudice. A man was judged by his conduct, not his skin. The station became a sanctuary. It was a neutral ground where the law was kept not by a badge, but by the quiet, formidable presence of the man and woman who ran it. The villains of their story faded. As all shadows do when noon approaches, Colton Rusk did not go to prison, for men of his wealth rarely did. But he was broken. The federal investigation froze his assets, and the scandal of the bribery turned his political allies against him. He was forced to sell off the southern herd and large parcels of his land to pay his legal fees. He retreated to his ranch house, a bitter king ruling over a shrinking kingdom. His power drained away like water in the sand. The Indian agent, Miller, was removed from his post and indicted for fraud. A new agent arrived from Austin, a stern man who adhered strictly to the treaties. He was not a friend, but he was a man of the law, and that was all Ta required. As for Ambrose Thorne, he remained a distant specter. The marshal held the ledger, and the threat of exposure kept the stepfather at bay. His lawyers sent one final letter, a blustering document full of legal jargon, which Jessie read once and then fed to the fire. She realized then that her fear of him had been the fear of a child waiting for punishment. She was no longer a child. She was a woman who had faced lynch mobs and dust storms. Ambrose Thorne was just a man, and a small one at that. 6 months after the wedding, on a late afternoon in spring, Jessie walked to the front gate. It was the same gate she had approached that first evening, trembling with exhaustion, her boots falling apart, her throat parched. She remembered the terror she had felt, the desperation of a beggar asking for crumbs. She ran her hand over the rough wood of the post. It was the same wood, but the hand touching it was different. Her skin was brown from the sun. Her fingers were calloused from the garden hoe and the chalk. She wore a dress of sturdy blue cotton that she had sewn herself. On her hip, she carried the heavy ring of keys that opened every lock on the property. She was not a guest. She was not a servant. She was the mistress of Tawakoni's station. Ta walked up behind her. He had been checking the new foal in the south pasture. He moved quietly, as he always did, but she knew he was there. She felt the warmth of him before she felt his hand on her shoulder. "The stagecoach is late," Ta said, looking down the road. "It is the mud near the crossing," Jessie replied. "The rains were heavy last night." She leaned back against him, and his arms came around her waist, resting comfortably. A familiar embrace. "I was thinking," Jessie said, looking at the horizon where the sun was beginning to dip, painting the sky in violent, beautiful streaks of violet and orange. "About the day I came here. I remember," Ta said. "You look like a ghost who had lost her grave." "I asked you for a job," Jessie said, "and you told me you didn't need a servant." Ta laughed, a low rumble in his chest. "I was right. A servant would have run away when the barn caught fire. A servant would have given the book to the sheriff and taken the first train east. You said you needed a wife," Jessie continued, "to hold the land. I was wrong about that," Ta said. He turned her around so he could look into her face. The setting sun caught the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the depth of his eyes. "I did not need a wife for the land. Jessie, I needed a wife for life. The land is just dirt. You are the rain." Jessie reached up and touched his face. "We built a good life. Ta, it is hard, but it is good. It is free," Ta said. "That is all that matters." "Free," Jessie repeated. She realized then what the word truly meant. Freedom was not the absence of obligation. It was not wandering the plains alone, beholden to no one. Freedom was the ability to choose your burdens. She had chosen this land. She had chosen this job. And she had chosen this man. They walked together toward the water trough, the windmill creaking rhythmically above them. The water was clear and cold, reflecting the colors of the twilight sky. It was the water that Rusk had tried to steal, the water that had almost caused a war. Now, it flowed steadily, nourishing the garden, the horses, and the travelers who passed through. Taw dipped a tin cup into the water and handed it to her, just as he had done on that first night. Jessie took it. She drank, the cool liquid washing away the dust of the day. She handed the cup back to him, and their fingers brushed, the silver ring glinting in the fading light. "I never did learn how to mend a shirt properly," Jessie teased softly. "And I never learned how to cook beans that taste like anything but mud," Taw replied, taking a drink. "We are a good match, then," Jessie said. "We are," Taw agreed. He set the cup down and took her hand. They stood side by side, watching the sun disappear behind the edge of the world. The wind blew through the buffalo grass, a whispering song that had been sung on these plains for 1,000 years. It was a song of survival, of endurance, and of the stubborn, resilient thing called love. Jessie squeezed his hand. Taw squeezed back. She was no longer the girl asking for work. He was no longer the warrior standing alone at the edge of civilization. They were Tawakoni and Jessie, partners in the great, wide, wild business of living. And as the first star appeared in the vast Texas sky, they turned together and walked back toward the warm yellow light of their home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey through the dust and wind of the Texas Panhandle, and I hope you felt every moment of Jessie and Taw's fight for their home and their hearts. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening to this story from. I am always amazed to see how far these tales travel. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales, and hit that like button. If you really want to help these stories reach more people, please press the hype button. Your support keeps the spirit of the West alive. Thank you, and I will see you on the next trail.